So by the time you see this video, the ministers will be sworn in as the cabinet of national unity. And for once, we actually have a fair idea of what the priorities are for these different ministers from these different parties. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about.
Yes, this is kind of unusual because usually what tends to happen is the ANC appoints ministers and those ministers just continue messing up their portfolios like they always have. And so you don't actually get an understanding as to what the actual priorities are. But I suppose even before we should start this, we should realize that the negotiations for the government of national unity were filled with a lot of kerfuffle. I think we all saw it, right? And we all saw it was touch and go. You know what's interesting to note, Ramon, is that despite only having like one seat in parliament, apparently Al Jamal, when they joined the government of national unity, they wanted to post a deputy president. It's nothing like setting your goals higher. Imagine your mayor. We all know your mayor could have been deputy president. That would have been interesting.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, Al Jamal is basically a proxy of the ANC, and I mean, to win one seat in parliament and one deputy president. Hey, they did the same to Joburg and Ekurhuleni, so maybe that is the reason why they wanted it. But they are very happy with the deputy minister of social development, whatever the hell that means. So let's get to real people with real portfolios. Let's start off with Home Affairs. So Leon Schreiber from the DA is the new Minister of Home Affairs, and his priority, he says, is to streamline work visas for critical skills in South Africa. And I think this is very straightforward, and yeah, why not?
So this has actually been an ongoing issue for the South African government for some time, and that is a lot of individuals, if they want to even come here and invest, create a business and do what, they obviously need a visa to stay, look after the business, grow the business and invest it, and they haven't actually been able to get visas passed for a very long time. I think if you actually listen to the Sono over the last couple of years, you hear Cyril drones on and on and on about sorting out this issue for some time. And by estimations, the amount of individuals that have actually not bothered with South Africa to bring skills here or even investment, just because the immigration process has been quite substantial. We've seen the Zimbabwe. You remember they had the whole extension of visas from Zimbabwe, and there's visa problems going with backlogs going back now nearly 2 years, so forth and so forth. It's just really not a good situation. And so Leon Schreiber says who's going to fix it. But actually, let's come on to something that's even more interesting, and that's Peter Groenewald says that he's going to reintroduce the death penalty. He says crime in South Africa is out of control. Only way to fix it, death penalty.
Well, I mean, interesting. So he didn't say this as the Minister of Correctional Services. He said this as the leader of the Freedom Front Plus in the past, and that's what he wants to do. I don't think it's within his mandate as the Minister of Correctional Services, but what you could do as a Minister of Correctional Services is just ban TikTok and the internet generally from prisons, like actually make prisoners work, make forced labor great again in some instances. A lot of these prisoners like to sit around and form gangs and have sex with wardens. We don't want any of that stuff. We want the prisoners to pay their dues back for their crimes. And I think that would be a very good step. And of course, number 2, empower wardens to actually do the job properly, lift up the morale. I think Peter can do that.
Yes, now part of the reason that they say that the morale in the prison service is so bad is because the trade unions themselves, always the trade unions in South Africa, they say that their voices aren't really heard when it comes through to the prison service. So they say that the average prison guard, the average warden in the prisons are basically underpaid, underutilized, and very badly looked after, and this results in many of those said individuals actually becoming criminals themselves because the service just isn't very pleasant to work for. And so, obviously, Peter has now got to go and then basically sort that out. But you know what? Talking of jokers, Gateson's also said what his priority as Minister of Sport and Culture is going to be. And he says he's going to introduce the international well-loved sport of spinning cars. Yep, spinning cars.
Yeah, I had to double check this. So he wants to make spinning like a well-known sport. So spinning is what happens in, if we may say, like colored communities where you take a old BMW and you do donuts with it, and everyone screams and shouts and delights and then gets crushed. Apparently that's pretty cool, and I think Gayton says he wants to make this sort of a national sport for some reasons. I'm not too sure why. I think it goes well with his constituency, which is the coloured people of South Africa, who generally vote for him, but who mostly vote for the DA. Just curious thing. Like when I think about how can we improve sports, doing spinning is not really one of them. Like maybe just make sports facilities more accessible for poor people. That would be a good start. But he says he's going to do that as well. So, I mean, you can do more than one thing at a time.
Yes, of course. And obviously, Gaten had a lot to say about Ronaldo because, him and Ronaldo have this love-hate relationship on X where they both basically love to hate each other. And he says, obviously, one of the people that Ronaldo wasn't a fan of is Mama Joy. He says he loves Mama Joy. So he's going to make sure she gets a pay rise and goes to all the games in South Africa because reasons. And, fair enough. Maybe he'll have some success. But let's actually go on to defense. Now, I admit Holomisa was made deputy president of defense. He says that his first priority is to make sure that defense actually has some money. He says there's no money in defense. He says there's not even guns. They sold the guns for food or whatever. And unfortunately, a lot of those guns are now being used in crimes. And he admits that, which is a nice change from Gun-Free South Africa, who might want to fact check him because he's right, and you guys are often wrong when you say guns come from, private citizens. But he says that we don't actually have a defense force because there's no money. And so his first order of priority would be to get some money and upgrade the defense force.
Yeah, which wouldn't be a bad thing. People forget that Bantu was a general, right? I think in the Transkei or the Ciskei, I can't remember, one of them. And he basically took power through a coup. Like he brought in the Rhodesians to help him as well in the early 90s. So, I mean, the guy knows, he was in the army for a very long time. We can suspect that he knows more about defense than the minister itself, Angie Moshecha, who, destroyed education. So, yeah, giving more money to defense is quite a good idea, and we can have a functioning army once again. Speaking of armies, it looks like Dean McPherson, the Minister of Public Works, wants to declare war on an army, and that army is called the Construction Mafia. So the Construction Mafia basically funds MK, retards infrastructure projects mostly in KZN and Eastern Cape, and are basically a bunch of gangs that go around, demand 30% of the project, and if they don't get it, they just shoot you in the head. This is what they do. So Dean says this is enemy number one. There's a line in the sand, and we're not going to stand for this at all. I'm against blue light convoys, but I think in this case, the Minister of Public Works needs more like 3 of them.
Yes, and so obviously Peter Groenewald said he doesn't want his blue light brigade. He says he doesn't need it. He doesn't need his bodyguards. He's got hunting rifles, and there's donate them to Dean because Dean's going to need them. What Dean is proposing doing is basically going to make him the Liz Truss of South Africa, only he will not be resigning. He will be signing his own death warrant. So good luck to you, Dean. Godspeed to you, my friend. See you on the other side.
No, but it's very important that he actually does prevent the construction mafia from existing, because as a government, what you want to do first is you take out the other influences of violence, because you want to be the monopoly on violence. So, I mean, I fully think that this is a great thing to do. It just has a lot of risks for him personally.
Yeah, a lot of risks for him personally. But, Ramon, I'm reminded at the moment, we still don't know what John's going to do. John is obviously Minister of Agriculture. And I must say that when I first heard Minister of Agriculture, I thought, well, that sounds like a nonsense portfolio. What do you actually do? Sit there and grow some food, look after the sheep? I don't know. So I actually looked into it. He's actually got a very difficult portfolio. So he's basically got to juggle land reform around agricultural developments and obviously funding of that land reform. So when you made that joke on Twitter that John got the land, John really did get the land. He genuinely did. And he has to somehow work with the Minister of Land Reform to make sure that the land gets allocated out to sustainable farmers, obviously in line with the Agri-BE program, which is going to be interesting because, as you know, the DA aren't fans of BE, but that's part of his portfolio now. But anyway, John hasn't actually announced what he's going to be doing.
No, not yet. But I mean, I think the easy wins are going to be vaccination for animals. There's always a chronic shortage, especially for horses and cows and things like that. Onderstepoort, which is the main veterinary practice, is in shambles and abysmal. So you can fix that. And of course, helping to get produce from here to the ports and exported could be a good thing. Maybe banning the live export of animals. So we have those terrible videos of, sheep on a boat heading to who knows where, but they're alive on the boat in terrible conditions. That could be an easy one as well. So there's quite a lot to do in terms of agriculture. And it's basically just making sure that farmers have access to what they need when they need it. Because at the moment, they can't buy vaccines independently. They have to buy it from the state. The state doesn't procure any. And you have, cow flu or whatever you call it all the time. And this is a direct result of state inefficiency. So fix the state inefficiencies and you can have a thriving agricultural sector, I think.
Yes. I'm actually going to agree with you on that because, as you know, I ride horses. I own some horses. I have horses on my property. And yes, you cannot get African horse flu vaccination for love or money, mate. Like, there's literally one comes into the country every 6 months. It's a pretty bad show. And as a result, horse racing and horse riding in South Africa is not exactly experiencing a renaissance because the animals are getting sick. So, yes, the vaccines is obviously a big one. I don't think it's going to be an easy time allocating land. And actually, then we should probably come off to one of the other things that Dean Murphyson said. I know we skipped it. He wants to sell off a lot of the public infrastructure. He says we have too much. So we've got like 80,000 government buildings or something. And he's like, we don't use them. They all sit there in disrepair. Quite often they've got squatters in them. We should probably just get rid of them. So that's going to be an interesting one.
Yeah, very much so. And if you look at what the IFP in KZN has found out, that all the government buildings in KZN are basically empty, and all the government workers are in the rented buildings next door. So obviously, the ANC gave all those cadres the rental agreement for government offices. Meanwhile, the actual government offices are empty and in decrepit condition and full of illegal immigrants. So getting rid of them would be excellent. We also have 5 million hectares of land. We can give a lot of that to poor farmers in a sustainable way. So all of this is like sort of very easy, quick wins, and I hope they pursue them.